They say that in small towns, everyone knows everyone, but that's not entirely true. There are always secrets, and some doors hide things better left undiscovered. My name is David, and I've always thought of myself as a simple guy. I live in a quiet town where the streets empty as soon as the sun sets, where the nights are still, and the only sounds are the occasional rustling of leaves or a distant dog barking. My house is an old one-story building with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it's home, or at least it used to be. It all started with a small habit I never gave much thought to. Locking my door at night, I never skipped it. Almost like an instinct, maybe it was leftover anxiety from my childhood, a memory of my parents always checking the locks before bed. But in this town, everyone does the same. You don't really ask why. It's just what you do. The stories from the past have a way of lingering in places like this. Tales of things that roam after dark, of shadows that don't quite match the figures casting them. For years, it was routine. Check the locks, turn off the lights, and try to get some sleep until one night, something strange happened. I had just finished my usual ritual, turning the key and feeling that reassuring click when I heard it. A light knock at the door. It was so soft that I almost thought I'd imagined it. Paused, listening for a few seconds, but the night outside was silent, shrugging it off. I turned and headed to my bedroom, but the next night, it happened again. The same soft knock, as if someone was tapping their nails against the wood. I approached the door, hesitating with my hand on the knob. For a moment, I considered opening it, but a chill ran down my spine. Instead, I pressed my ear against the cold wood, holding my breath. There was a faint sound on the other side, a raspy, shallow breathing, like someone trying to remain unnoticed. My heart pounded, and I backed away slowly, forcing myself to ignore it. Maybe it was a prank, I told myself. Maybe just some teenager messing around, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I tried to sleep that night, but every creak of the house felt amplified, like the shadows in my room were moving just a little closer than before. The next morning, I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. But as I stepped outside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door had scratches on it, thin and erratic, as if someone or something had tried to get in. They were right where the lock was, long marks that trailed down the wood, disappearing just above the doorknob. I told myself it must have been an animal, maybe a stray dog. But as the days went on, the knocking became more frequent. The scratches deeper, and that breathing, it grew louder, more desperate, like whatever was on the other side was growing impatient. I knew I should have told someone, but who would believe me? And besides, what could they do? It's just a door, and some nights, it's better left closed. Each night, the sound became harder to ignore. Locking the door, which used to be an automatic gesture, became a nervous task marked by the sound of my trembling hands turning the key. I found myself waiting, holding my breath, knowing that at some point, that soft tapping would start again. But that night was different. The air was colder, much colder than it should have been for that time of year. The wind howled outside, carrying dry leaves down the sidewalk. But even then, I could hear the first gentle knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. It sounded distant, yet somehow too close, like it was happening inside my own head. I tried to ignore it. I turned on the TV, cranking up the volume, forcing myself to focus on anything but the sound at the door. But the knocks continued, growing more insistent. Eventually, I turned off the TV and stared at the front door, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to open it, to confront whatever was out there, but I knew there was a danger there, a danger I couldn't understand. Then the sound suddenly stopped, as if whoever was on the other side had left. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it didn't last long. That's when I heard something far more unsettling. The faint metallic scrape of something against the lock, as if someone or something was trying to unlock the door from the outside. I froze, my eyes fixed on the latch as it jiggled slightly. The scraping stopped, but then came something worse. The doorknob turned. Not fully, but enough for me to know I wasn't alone. I felt my blood run cold as I watched the knob return to its original position. I took a step back, trying to convince myself that I was safe, that the door was still locked. But outside, I could hear that breathing. Louder now, more desperate, like whatever was out there knew I was watching. With my heart in my throat, I ran to the kitchen, grabbing a knife. My eyes stayed locked on the door, waiting for the moment it would give way, but the night remained eerily quiet. No more knocks, no more scratches, no more attempts to get in. Only the cold air seeping through the bottom of the door, chilling my bare feet. I knew I wouldn't sleep, so I sat there, on the couch in the living room, facing the door, gripping the knife so tightly my fingers ached. Every little creak of the wood made me flinch, waiting for the next sound, but nothing came. It was only in the morning that I found the courage to approach again. I dug firm, opened the door cautiously, trying to appear braver than I felt. The sun was already up, and its light flooded the entrance, blinding me for a moment. I looked outside and my eyes widened. On the doorstep, there was something I hadn't expected to find. A small wooden figure, roughly carved. It looked like a little doll, but it was worn with deep scratches all over its body and a carved expression that seemed pained. I picked it up carefully, feeling the rough wood against my fingers, and noticed something engraved on the base. A simple word that chilled me to the bone. Open. I dropped the figure, my heart racing. This wasn't some childish prank. I knew there was something wrong with this town, but I never thought it ran this deep. Now I was involved, and worse, I felt like whoever, or whatever, was outside knew it too. That night, I locked the door as usual, but now the lock seemed too fragile, too weak to keep whatever it was outside. The last thing I heard before I finally drifted off to sleep was a sound that terrified me more than all the others. The sound of a muffled laugh, coming from somewhere very close. Right after another soft knock on the door, the next night, I couldn't stop thinking about the wooden figure I found on my doorstep. The word open carved into it echoed in my mind, like a command I didn't want to follow but couldn't. Forget even with the curtains drawn and the lights on in the living room. I felt something lurking outside, waiting for the smallest mistake. That night was colder than the last, and the feeling of being watched was almost tangible. I shut every window, locked the door with 2 turns of the key, and sat on the couch, trying to convince myself I was safe, but I knew I wasn't. Something was out there, waiting, watching, somehow knowing that if I opened the door, there would be no turning back. It was 2 a.m. when it all started again. First, the soft tapping on the door, insistent, rhythmic, like it was trying to set a tempo. Knock, knock, knock this time. There was no doubt it wasn't my imagination. The sound was real as the night itself. I stood slowly, approaching the door, and stood there too afraid to speak or open it. I wanted to ask who was there, but I feared the answer. Instead, I pressed my ear against the cold wood, straining to hear anything beyond the tapping. The silence seemed to pulse from the other side, a void that made me nauseous. Then, the breathing began again, now heavier, more urgent. I backed away, swallowing hard, and the sound stopped. A new silence filled the room, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, it had left. But then, a different sound came, one that made my blood freeze, the sound of something scraping, like nails scratching at the wood, carving deep lines against the door. It was as if it was writing something, and each scratch made my heart pound. My mind panicked, and I ran to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me, as if that could protect me. The knife I had taken the night before was still there, but somehow, holding it made me feel even more vulnerable. I hid in the corner of the room, trying to calm my breathing. but it came short and shaky, as if my own body refused to obey me. For a while, everything was quiet. I thought the night had passed, that I could convince myself it was just another nightmare. But then, the sound returned, coming directly from the hallway, outside my bedroom door. Knock, knock, knock. Now it wasn't at the front door. It was right here, at my door. And this time, the whisper came with it, a low murmur that made my skin crawl. Open, let me in. The words were slow, drawn out, like the voice had to put effort into forming each sound. I felt tears well up in my eyes as I gripped the knife so hard my fingers hurt. I couldn't open. I knew that if I did, I would be lost. But then a new sound came from the door. The doorknob of my bedroom began to turn, slowly and firmly, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. But something held it back. I watched, paralyzed, as the knob twisted back and forth. Before returning to its original position, the voice whispered again, closer now, more distinct. You let me in before. Why not now? I shut my eyes tightly, curling up against the wall, trying to ignore it, trying to disappear into that small enclosed space. The whisper continued, now a plea. A voice old and full of hunger. The sound of nails scratching at the door grew louder, and I knew I didn't have much time. The wood began to creak as if something was pushing against it, trying to break through. Then everything stopped. A profound silence filled the room. The doorknob returned to its place and the scratching ceased. I thought for a second that maybe it had given up, that I had resisted long enough. But when I opened my eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the floor beneath the door, a new object had been left. It was the wooden figure, the same one I had thrown away that morning, but now it was even more worn, with deeper scratches. Its face had a new expression, like it was smiling, and on the base, a word I hadn't seen before was carved, choose. When the darkness swallowed me, I thought it was the end. The sensation of being dragged into the void was like falling into a bottomless pit where the air was cold and thick, and the sound of my own heartbeat faded into the distance. I braced myself for pain, for the end. But what came was worse. A feeling of being trapped somewhere between reality and a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then suddenly, the darkness gave way to light. I blinked several times, my eyes burning as they adjusted. What I saw when I opened them was my bedroom. Exactly as I had left it, with the door still closed and the key in the lock. I was lying on the floor, the knife beside me, as if nothing had ever happened. The morning sun streamed in through the cracks in the curtains, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe it had all been just a terrible dream, a delirium. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky. The house was strangely silent, like every sound was being swallowed by something unseen. But then, one detail caught my eye. The wooden figure. It was back on the threshold of my bedroom door, but now its expression had changed again. Instead of agony or a smile, its eyes were hollow, empty, as if all emotion had been drained from it. I tried to ignore it, but when I picked it up, a chill ran down my spine. On the base, the words had changed once more. Instead of choose, now it read, you are here. That's when I realized the mistake. I wasn't home. Not really. The hallway looked the same, but the light streaming through the windows had a sickly green tint, like the sun itself was distorted. The shadows on the walls seemed to move with a life of their own, writhing like smoke. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, like I was walking through a hollow shell of my real home. It was as if I was in a replica, but every detail was just slightly wrong. Suddenly, a familiar sound returned, echoing through the hallway, the knock at the door. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It came from every door, from every wall, from every corner. Knock, knock, knock. The muffled laughter followed, but this time, I knew it was coming from inside me. It was the voice of the thing that had pulled me into this place. I tried to open the front door, but it was locked. As if it was only part of the illusion, panic overtook me, and I ran to the window trying to see outside, but all I saw was a dense, endless darkness, like the same void that had swallowed me before. The truth hit me like a cold blade. I was still there, trapped in the darkness I had opened, and now it had created a prison that looked like my home, but one I could never leave. The knocks on the door grew louder, and with them, the whisper I knew too well. You can't leave, because now you're part of it. And so, I became the shadow on the other side. The door, that damn door, became my only link to the real world. And sometimes, on nights when the wind blows strangely, I try to warn whoever lives where I used to. I knock softly. I whisper into the silence of the night, hoping that this time, someone makes the right choice. So, if you ever hear a soft knock at your door, followed by a whisper begging to come in, please make the right choice and lock your door at night.